Hello and welcome to another episode of History Hack. To say that we are excited today is a massive understatement, isn't it, Alina?
Oh, I'm just beyond excited to start talking about this. It is a secret fantasy of mine. Well, not so secret anymore.
It's like your secret obsession with ancient history that's not secret at all.
Exactly. But we've got with us Polina Ignatova. She's a medieval historian and associate lecturer at Lancaster University, and she specialises in something that we're bouncing off the walls for this. Are you guys ready for what we're going to be talking about today? We are talking about The Walking Dead.
Boom, but not the TV programme, because we suspect it might really irritate Polina. But she is an expert on the undead in the medieval period, so we're doing medieval zombies. Polina, welcome.
Hello.
So much. When we saw what your speciality was, Alina was like, sounds kind of complicated. What does that mean? I was like, I think it's zombies. And she was like, oh my God. And now you're here, so we're very, very excited because we are essentially massive children, aren't we?
We are massive children, loving this.
I can't wait. Should we just start? Let's start. Yeah. I'm so excited.
Do it, go.
Okay, so ignoring popular culture and stuff, because we're talking about historically, what is a zombie?
So technically, I don't call them zombies in my work because the word zombie originates from West Africa.
Yeah.
And every time, so I prefer to use zombies in informal conversation because it's just one word and it's really easy and it summarizes. But in the official research events, there'll always be someone who would be like, excuse me, but the word zombie originates from West Africa and you're not talking about Africa. So within the European context, it will be Walking Dead, and these are the dead bodies which for some reason made to rise from the graves and to participate in some activities or to do something. And basically they are pretty much the same as zombies in modern movies. So the principle is that some supernatural power makes these dead bodies move again and act as if they're alive, but they're clearly not alive.
So where does the idea of zombies actually come from? You've mentioned West Africa.
Yes. So this is for the word zombie and probably the idea of zombies in modern culture to a certain extent. The zombies in medieval history, Walking Dead in medieval British sources, come from Roman texts which survived into the medieval period, because I tried to trace it back, and Roman sources such as Appius, Coldenus, or Lucan's Pharsalia are the sources, the examples of sources which contain stories about Walking Dead. And in Roman sources, the Walking Dead are usually brought back by magicians who use their powers to reanimate this dead body. This idea was transmitted into medieval texts, and obviously in the medieval context it was changed to fit into the Christian agenda. So in medieval texts we have not sorcerers but saints using their power to reanimate the dead. And usually they reanimate the sinners, so they turn the sinners into walking dead as a form of punishment for what they have done.
So looking at then, so there's clearly a differentiation, isn't there, between the modern zombie that we see on the television and where that's come from, and the zombies that you deal with in medieval literature. How do they differ?
So if we talk about modern zombies, so in a few modern movies, we have scientific explanations for the existence of zombies, or the attempts at scientific explanations for the existence of zombies. So usually there is a virus, an infection, which turns people into zombies. And I think My favorite ever zombie film is the first Resident Evil, because first of all, that was the first zombie film I've ever watched.
Mhm.
And secondly, because it weirdly explains everything very clearly. So they create this like really coherent narrative of where zombies come from. In medieval sources, the explanation for the existence of Walking Dead is not scientific in the modern sense. So they usually explain that the restless corpse is a restless corpse because there is also something inside it. But in contrast to modern films, it's not a virus, but it's either the soul of the dead person, which is stuck inside the body. So ideally, in the medieval worldview, when you die, your soul is supposed to move to hell, to purgatory, or to heaven. In case of Walking Dead, the soul cannot leave the body, so it's stuck inside. It's not happy inside. It wants to proceed anywhere, but just not linger inside this dead corpse. And that's why this walking corpse starts walking around, bothering the living, because it kind of needs to get the attention to the living, to start to ask them to pray for it, so as the soul can go outside when it is forgiven by the god. And alternatively, there is the devil, which finds the dead body and it kind of uses it as a puppet, or you can have this like mental image, if it wears it as a costume. So the devil sneaks inside the dead corpse and moves it around to terrify the living. So it is one or the other. But in the medieval sources, interestingly, still they created this connection between Walking Dead and infection. So in medieval sources, Walking Dead sometimes are also described to spread infection, but this infection does not turn other people into zombies.
You know, I've got to say, the idea of the devil dancing around in a corpse, I think creeps me out far more than a reanimated corpse, you know, without a soul and, you know, all that kind of thing. I'm just really feeling really creeped out right now.
To be honest, I think if you saw Eva, you'd scream and run away.
Well, I don't know. Well, you say this now. How do you know? I might become some sort of super zombie killer.
Oh, no. We'll get to this later on. We'll get to the zombie plan later on. I know in your head you see yourself as like this ninja with face makeup on and stuff, and a gun slung over your back, and you'd go full native and that. But I suspect there'd be a lot of crying and screaming.
I have never screamed at anything. Well, except for when something's really awesome.
Yeah. We'll get to this later. We'll get to the zombie apocalypse plans later. But where do they come from in the medieval period?
So it's usually a sinner. So actually there is a difference between British and European sources, which I find also quite interesting. So in British sources, we learn usually from a Walking Dead story the biography of the person who was turned into a Walking Dead. So we're usually told that this person used to be a sinner. And sometimes the narrators are not particularly specific, so they just say that they did something horrible, or they were a really nasty person and they probably died excommunicated. In some stories, we get lots of context about what these people have done. And there is like no universal sin which leads you to being a zombie. So usually the scenes from all the sources created in medieval England, the scenes described there are quite diverse. So I used to have a list which I would show at the presentations and the PowerPoints, like things which will turn you into a zombie. And the scenes were quite diverse, from being an evil queen and terrorizing your people. I'm talking now about the legendary Anglo-Saxon queen Conquest, which in real life was quite a nice person, but there is a legend about her being evil, usurping power, killing her little brother, and then turning into a Walking Dead after her death. There is another scene which is completely different from this one. So there is a story of a guy who was married, and then he started to suspect that his wife is cheating on him. So he pretends to leave, and then he climbs on the ceiling beam, and he hides on the ceiling beam in her bedroom. And then he sees her with the lover, and he becomes so angry that he falls down from the ceiling beam, injures himself very badly, and dies the following morning. And because he is about to die, his wife says, like, do you want me to call the priest so as you can confess your sins before you die? And this is a really important thing in the Middle Ages, to make sure you confess all your sins and repent them before your death. And because he's still angry with his wife, he goes like, no, I don't want to be a priest. So he dies and also becomes a walking dead. So you can become a walking corpse for spying over your unfaithful wife. And in Europe, in contrast, the situation is completely different. So in European sources, we do not get this life stories of the individuals who become zombies. So usually we're just told that the devil entered a random corpse at the cemetery, which kind of creates this kind of feeling of being unsafe, that like no matter what you do, when you die, your corpse can become the toy for the demon to wear it and to terrify the living.
How does all of this compare to things now, like the zombie movies we see now?
I think this is quite the same, because I feel like in English sources we get this like really strong connection between someone not leading a particularly pious life from the medieval point of view, from the medieval Christian point of view. And at the same time, in the films about Walking Dead I have watched, I'm not claiming to have seen all of them because there's like hundreds and hundreds, but the ones like the most famous ones, they usually create this connection between the environmental issues and the Walking Dead. So usually at the beginning of the film, you can see these references to climate change, to environmental problems that led to the rise of this, like to the appearance of this infection, which turns people into zombies. Or there is this idea of some secret evil laboratory which tries to create a biological weapon, and then this virus escapes and everyone becomes a zombie. Or this idea of consumerism and just the if you remember Romero's film, when the zombies walk around the shopping mall,
Mm-hmm.
and they, like the protagonists, basically say that they're just like us. So in the modern films, interestingly, they still have this connection between like collective guilt and Walking Dead. In the medieval context, is more of an individual guilt rather than collective.
That's really interesting. So how do they look in medieval texts? Do they look like the kind of, I mean, I posted one online today of a zombie clawing its way towards coffee, and they're sort of like rotting bodies. Do they look like that in the medieval period?
Well, this is interesting because usually they did not offer any straightforward descriptions. But if you look through a number of sources, you can kind of put together an idea. So first of all, they didn't agree whether zombies were decomposing or whether they were not decomposing. So in some sources, the Walking Dead were decomposing as any dead bodies, and that's how they actually spread infection. So because the decomposing corpse is supposed to be buried to prevent the spread of infection, and they were not buried, they were kind of walking around, the air became polluted and people started to die. There is also one really creepy story about a walking corpse which had like a swarm of flies buzzing around it, and this also hints at the decomposition. Other sources, on the contrary, described Walking Dead as not decomposing, and that was again meant to be terrifying for a medieval person because it was against the nature. So the dead corpse ideally should decompose, and they were not. And this is linked to the medieval idea that if a devil occupies a dead body, it doesn't decompose. So if a body is not decomposing, that means there is a devil inside. Also, it's kind of linked to the appearance. The way people in the Middle Ages imagined souls being inside the bodies is different from how we imagine it. So after the person died, if their soul was stuck inside, it wasn't the same as they were alive. So if we think about ourselves alive, and if we assume we have souls, it kind of feels like the soul is really, really connected to the body. And sorry, I'm getting metaphysical here, but basically after death, the soul which got stuck inside the dead body became disconnected from it. So it was wearing it as a really kind of clumsy, uncomfortable costume.
Yeah.
And the medieval narrators had this idea of a soul like sitting inside the body, as if you climb inside a big jar and you sit inside a big jar or a big barrel. And the soul after death did not use the body, like, for example, if I speak now, obviously use my tongue and I'm using my face muscles and articulation. After the death, the soul didn't need this. It could speak by itself. So there is a really creepy story again about a dead corpse who would speak to the living, but it wouldn't use its mouth or tongue. It would just, the soul would speak from inside this body, and the voice also echoed as if it was sitting inside this like big empty barrel.
That's really, really creepy.
I'm more creeped out than I thought I would be in this podcast.
You thought you'd seen it all on TV, didn't you?
Well, yeah, that's how it is. You get so exposed to these sorts of things on TV that violence doesn't faze you. But talking about sitting in
it's very different to sort of almost a comical interpretation in film.
Agreed.
To go straight on to the one about reviving, because I don't think that's something you don't usually see in films, is it? There's no way back for a zombie. Is there a way back in a medieval text, like reviving people?
So there is a way back originally. So when the person dies, there is a way back for them to become a walking corpse. And interestingly, the first Walking Dead stories in medieval England, which can be identified at the moment as the earliest, come from the hagiographies, so from the lives of saints. And these are saints who bring the undead people, the dead people, back in the shape of zombies. And this is actually quite, when I just came across this for the first time, I found it really unusual because it's something not the saints, something not associated with the saints immediately. So you wouldn't think of saints doing such a grisly job as turning people into zombies, but that's what saints did in medieval English hagiographies to punish these individuals. And I do believe that it is based on the Roman idea of a sorcerer turning the dead individuals into walking corpses, because the principle is roughly the same. So a Roman sorcerer would appeal to Roman gods. So usually these were the gods of the underworld. And medieval saints appeal to Christian gods. So in both cases, we have this like revival of the dead individual with the help of the deity, which is worshipped by a given society. And these individuals, sometimes they are revived as just the undead. Sometimes they're given extra powers. So you brought up this like World War Z zombies, which were really intimidating because they also could run at you. And some of medieval zombies were also possessing some extra powers. So one of them could turn invisible, so you never knew if it is around. A couple of zombies from another source, they appeared sometimes in human shapes, so in their like undead shapes, but they also could assume the shapes of dogs and bears. And there is a Scottish zombie which could which possessed this body which was able to destroy any objects which were thrust into it. So if you try to damage it with a sword, for example, or with a pitchfork, it would just burn this object by its body. So saints were saints are one agent which turns people into Walking Dead. Another agent is the devil, as we have mentioned already.
It's interesting, don't you think, Alina? It's interesting that this kind of stuff doesn't get picked up in plots for the stuff we watch now.
No, it doesn't. But you've mentioned something, the invisible zombie. I mean, oh my God, what a whole other level. Why has TV not picked this up as an invisible zombie? That would be the coolest plot line.
I was just thinking, like, it's probably hard to make a film about anything invisible because you don't know what it's doing. So with the zombies, you can kind of, with the visible zombies, you can keep the audience like on edge by them like running at you. But when it is invisible, it's just
there's no chase scene, is there? There's just someone sitting there, I don't know, eating a potato or whatever, and then suddenly they're dead. There's no fun chase scene or anything because they don't see it coming. Do you know what it sounds like? More suitable for one of those hideous, over-the-top Japanese horror films.
Oh, I love those.
Yeah.
Well, I love Japanese horror. Not all of them, but some of them are so good.
Oh my God, we are on the same wavelength. I'm a massive horror film fan.
So we have to talk about brains, don't we? It's all about eating the brains in modern crap. Do you see that in the medieval period?
No, and so in medieval English context, they're not interested in eating anything. So there is one source which kind of hints at the possibility that Walking Dead would be drinking blood, and this is William of Newborough. So he calls one of his Walking Dead Sanguisuga, which in Latin means leech. And he said that this restless corpse was filled with blood of many other people. But otherwise, they basically walk around terrifying people, spreading infections sometimes, but they're not particularly interested in eating you. In Scandinavian sources, the situation is different. So there is a story when they are two really close friends, and they are so close that they decide that when the first one of them dies, the other one will be buried with him. So eventually one of them dies, and his friend is buried with him in his burial mound with the grave goods, which also includes a dog, a horse. And on the first night, this dead friend revives and eats the dog. And on the second night, he revives and eats the horse. And on the third night, he revives and tries to eat his living friend. But luckily, at this moment, the living from outside break into the burial mound because they hope that there is some treasure buried. So they basically just want to loot it. And instead of treasure, they find this living person covered in blood because this undead friend tried to chew off his face, and then the living person tells the story. So this is what's happening in Scandinavia. In England, they are quite indifferent to brains, but at the same time we have the same idea that if you chop off the head of the zombie, it will die. So this idea in the films when they say shooting their head in the heads, go for their heads, it comes from the medieval context. It comes from the medieval sources. So they already had this idea of the head being like the most important. And it's kind of not really logical, because you think like, if it is the dead body which walks around, why would it not walk around without the head? Because it's already contradicting the laws of nature. And I think the logic behind it was that in medieval sources, heads sometimes had their own agency. So the head would talk by itself. In a few stories, we get this head separated from the body and being able still to talk and to sing. And the head was supposed to grow back sometimes if you place it next to the neck. So in Life and Miracles of Saint Edmund was decapitated, but then when his body was found, his head miraculously grew back. So that's why in medieval zombie stories, we have the living chopping off their heads and placing them between the legs of the body, so as the body cannot find the head and then reattach it.
It's quite a genius plan.
I'm a little bit dumbfounded.
I knew this would happen. I knew we'd do this podcast, and by the end of it, you'd be like proper terrified of a zombie apocalypse.
Well, no, rephrase this.
Medieval zombie apocalypse.
Not one of those that's out there now, but reattaching heads. Oh my God, how are you going to kill these people?
Well, they're already dead, which is weird because they're not. It's creepy. But we all need a hero. You've written in the notes, Alina. We do. Is there a hero that takes on zombies in medieval literature?
There are lots of heroes, and they're quite badass. So I really like the heroes in medieval literature. So the first hero is Saint Hugh of Lincoln, who you all know, and everyone knows him for his many other achievements, such as kissing Richard I, for example. But less known is the fact that Saint Hugh has contributed to putting to rest one of the zombies. So he wrote the letter of absolution, which basically forgives all the individual's sins. And this letter was placed in the grave of Orestes' corpse. And after that, he stopped walking around. And one thing I forgot to mention, actually, which is important. So in zombie films today, we have the zombies just continuously walking around. So they are undead. They do not need rest. They never sleep. They're always there to hunt you. In the medieval zombie apocalypse, it was actually slightly better, because all walking dead needed to rest in the graves for a certain while. So while they're chilling in the graves, you can open the grave and destroy the body. In one of the stories, there is a monk, and this is particularly interesting because I think that the members of clergy were not allowed to carry weapons, but that monk had a battle axe. So he was waiting by the grave of a restless corpse with a battle axe for it to come out. And when it came out and rushed on him, he managed to strike him a few times with his axe and chase him back into the grave. So these are the examples of actually clergy being the clergy contributing to pacifying restless corpses and putting them to rest and getting rid of them. There are other examples, and often, interestingly, by the same author, when the clergy is completely useless. So there is a story when the clergy tries to hold a council, like, what shall we do with the zombie? And this council turns into a feast. And while they're feasting, the local villagers take the matter in their hands and they destroy this walking corpse by fire. And again, interestingly, so we've talked about the necessity of destroying the head. They also believe that if it is the evil spirit inside this body, it occupies the heart. So you needed to carve the heart out and burn it And when you do it, the evil spirit finally leaves and kind of goes to the another kind of extraterrestrial realms. And in one of the stories, it's Life of Saint Madonna by Geoffrey Burton. He actually describes this heart being burned, and then when it finally burns up, it cracks open, and the evil spirit flies away in the shape of a raven.
We've touched on this already, but can you give us now, in this very moment, a brief lowdown of how to kill a zombie 101 medieval style?
Go for the head, remove it somewhere, like so as the zombie cannot find the head. Also, you can burn it, ideally. So burning in medieval context, so in modern context, when we talk about burning, we just think rationally, like obviously when you reduce this to ashes, it cannot work anymore. In the medieval context, in England specifically, they had this second meaning for burning, which was also, I believe, was inherited from the Roman context, because burning also meant transferring whatever is inside this dead body to the other world, away from the world of the living. Because in Roman texts, they burned, obviously they cremated their dead, and they also burned any objects which they wanted to send to their dead. So I'm kind of deviating a little bit from the main topic, but a really striking example is Lucian of Samosata's work, The Love of Lights, and he describes there how a husband was visited by the ghost of his dead wife, and the ghost says, like, look, you've burned only one of my sandals, and I need both of them, so could you please find the other sandal and burn it as well, so I have both of them in the afterlife. And the same logic was with burning the walking dead. So once you reduce the body to ashes, the entity inside it, like the soul or the devil, goes to the afterlife or away from the world of the living, so it cannot bother the living anymore. And alternatively, in some cases, some zombies can speak, and some of them are quite nice and friendly. Actually, they're terrifying, but they're usually terrifying people to draw attention, because the issue is that they died without having confessed their sins, so they want to talk to someone, to call the priest, to get an absolution, to get their sins forgiven, and then they can go to the afterlife. So sometimes people just have a chat with the zombie and then arrange a number of masses sent for them, a number of prayers said for them, and then the issue is solved.
You must have a plan. I feel like we would, with someone with your expertise here right now, we would be selling our listeners short if we did not help them plan for the eventuality of a zombie apocalypse. So what is your plan?
All of my colleagues made this joke at some point of my being a PhD, like, what are you going to do in the zombie apocalypse? I always thought that I would be really employable in case of the zombie apocalypse, so part of me actually looks forward to that. Again, the researcher part of me is actually excited about the zombie apocalypse, because you can actually study the zombies without just reading the text about them or watching films about them. You can capture one and keep you in your basement.
Think of the research you could do if you could just get hold of one.
Can I be your assistant?
Yeah, of course, sure.
So that's your plan.
I think Alex has got the best plan.
Okay, so this is going to come up on another podcast, because we talked about this the other day with someone else who has a zombie apocalypse plan in Canada. But so the last proper job I had in an office, there was lots of opportunities to sit around and talk absolute shit with each other. And we've kind of got a little collective of people who are going to survive the zombie apocalypse. We've already researched, you can already start stashing, if you're British, weapons, because obviously you're going to need something that's viable in a post-apocalyptic world, and it's legal to own a crossbow in Britain. And I'm not
Oh,
saying that I bought one, but one of our team has already purchased a crossbow. Yeah, it's not illegal. They're not classed as like an offensive weapon. Go figure. A certain size of them anyway, you can own. And then we were sort of sitting around and we were discussing like who would be in charge of organising stuff, and we had someone, Paul, who was very good at like boring stuff like organising admin, so he'd do that because he doesn't mind everyone hating him because he's telling them what to do. I'm going to be on brutal zombie killing duty with Nathan and his crossbow. But we had also as well, so if you picture the campest man you've ever met in your life, Kevin, I love you with all of my heart, you're adorable, but he said if the world exists and there is no PlayStation and no RuPaul's drag race, he doesn't want to be in it. He can't be bothered.
oh
He hates running. He's got no interest, so he is bait. He said, use me as bait. If ever there's a point, like, you can drive me around, but if ever there's a point where you need to throw a fat person at a zombie so that you can get away, just use me as bait, because frankly, I can't be bothered with it all. So we've gone into that level of planning.
So
well, this is really sophisticated. Oh, sorry, I interrupted you.
Yes.
No, it's okay. Go for it. Go for it.
We have at Lancaster, we have a cannon in the department, and we were told that it has been decommissioned, unfortunately. But I always thought that how hard it is to put back together a decommissioned cannon in case of a zombie apocalypse.
There's one outside one of the school buildings at Eton College that won't be hard to get to either. It's like a Crimean War one, but you could get to it, and likewise, I'm pretty sure. And then there's things like we'd already talked about making like tennis ball mortars as well.
Well,
I won't lie, we looked up the ingredients for napalm as well.
My question to you is, why do you think one of the reasons is I have a motorbike?
What happens when you run out of petrol?
Well, then you find the petrol out of another vehicle.
Okay, and if everyone's doing all this, how long do you think the petrol's going to last? This is why when we were interviewing Carolyn Willikis yesterday, she was saying that basically with all their horses, her and her friends are ready trained for a zombie apocalypse, aren't they?
Yeah, but eventually, I mean, for a little while, you're kind of hoping a lot of people get killed off, so then they won't be ciphering petrol. So at least you've got a chance on your motorbike. Or
I give you 2 weeks max before petrol just doesn't exist.
Well, you could always try and figure out a different way, like create a water motorbike.
So in a post-apocalyptic world, you're going to figure out a biofuel that no one has been able to figure out thus far in the world we live in now that doesn't require petrol. I'm just playing devil's advocate here. I think you need to ditch the motorbike. Polina, you have to agree with me. She needs to ditch the bike, doesn't she?
I'm just thinking it's actually, in my opinion, more complicated in British context, because most of the films we've seen, like except for the few like Shaun of the Dead, and the other one is at the tip of my tongue.
Is it 28 Days Later?
Yes, that's what I have in mind. So these are in British context, but in America they just have like a more massive chunk of land, so you can potentially travel to more places by land and look for petrol there, whereas like here on an island, I'm just thinking, like, will we have to cross the channel to Europe when we run out of resources?
You're going to have to come to mainland Europe, people. Come to mainland Europe.
Yeah, it's also, it brings me to another question, whether zombies can swim. So whether, is the channel safe, or are there going to be swimming zombies attacking your boat and biting through your boat?
I mean, we could theoretically line up on the White Cliffs of Dover and just hope they can't swim, but then take pot shots at them as they come over, can't we? As long as it doesn't start in Britain.
So you think, like, if it starts elsewhere and Britain can be safe because it's an island?
I mean, we'll get to the point where we don't produce enough resources to feed ourselves and shit later, but
yeah, that's what I was thinking. So like, if we have to cross to Europe and there's like zombies waiting for you in the water.
Yeah, I feel like there needs to be some kind of roundtable conference headed up by Polina, whereby we get our shit together and do a proper plan. Because I'm scared now after this podcast.
Oh, wouldn't mind that.
Yeah.
Well, you have your crossbow and you have a really coherent lined up plan.
I
Yeah.
will be there. Even if I have to cross mainland Europe, I will be there.
Just make sure there is always enough petrol in the motorbike to get you to Calais.
Well, this is the thing. Do you know what? You can buy motorbikes that are specially used for like the Dakar race. And
Yeah.
what they do, they have like these super duper like extra long tanks. What I'll do, I'll buy one of those, shove a load of petrol onto the back of the bike, because my dad can quite easily do Poland to England on a tank and a half. So ideal, perfect. I'm in.
Do you know what though? Tell me if you agree. You know these people that have the bunkers? I would not do that. I would
No.
go mad in a bunker underground with like tinned
just
food.
kill
I'd
people.
rather take my chances outside
Yes, freedom
than
and
die in a
possible.
hole.
Do people in England have bunkers, by the way? Because I always thought it's like more of an American thing.
Yeah, no, I don't think anyone has like, we don't really have the survivalist nut jobs. I mean, there's whole communities in America, isn't there, with like they're and they are seriously, I mean, we're taking the piss to a certain extent. They're seriously ready for the end of the world.
I'm thinking like, if like I didn't have such a coherent plan as you do, but I was always thinking lots of archives are situated underground. So
Yeah.
I was always thinking of hiding in the archive, and you can do research and also just
I like it, definitely. But there's also as well under London, there are masses of tunnels and things, aren't there? Which you could utilise, sort of
underground.
Yeah. So the London, not just the London Underground, but there's like the postal thing underground, isn't there? And there's all kinds of secret tunnels and things. So yeah,
But you don't want to get stuck in one of those.
no, definitely not.
So it's kind of I don't know, is it a good situation? Is it bad? You don't know.
I wouldn't live down there. I'd use them to get around.
Yeah, that's true. Sewers.
Yeah, probably last resort. Anyway, I feel like I'm in a better position to withstand the zombie apocalypse after this podcast than I was before we started. I don't know about you.
Agreed. Very much
And
so.
I love that Paulina's first instinct is to catch one and research it and to live in an archive. That would be cool, actually. Might actually be able to get in the National Archives for once if there's a zombie apocalypse. There's 92 miles of shelving to hide in, but I don't think it's... Just one last question, because I know you haven't sat and watched all the way through The Walking Dead, which I think everyone would assume you had. What's your favourite zombie movie?
I would say Resident Evil, because it was my first zombie film when I was introduced to zombies by my big brother, and I watched it as a teenager. And I mean, it's all gross. It's very gross. When I rewatched it, I was completely grossed out by all this, like the amount of gore and decomposing flesh and zombies. But I really like how coherently they explain, as I have said before, how coherently they explain everything which is happening there, and where zombies come from, and how the zombie virus works, and why does it work this way. So, I mean, it's kind of like really like a film on how zombies work. So I really enjoyed it from that point of view.
You know what I'm doing this weekend? Binge
Yeah.
watching zombie films.
I'm going to say World War Z just because we interviewed Max Brooks. We haven't aired that yet, actually, but he's lovely, and that was a pretty cool film. So
I've actually enjoyed World War Z as well. It was one of the zombie films which I when I started paying attention again, because like, when you see a few of them, they'll kind of start being the same, like zombies start living or hiding in some building, and then they run out of food. And World War Z was kind of a breath of fresh air. Yeah, I really enjoyed that film.
I do. If you just didn't have what's his name in it, I would have enjoyed it a bit more.
Brad Pitt.
Yeah, really didn't like him in that. Otherwise, the film was really well made. I just didn't like Brad Pitt in it personally. That's my only criticism.
I don't like him as a person as well. I find him quite annoying. So
yeah.
I was hoping that he will get eaten. So the fact that he didn't get eaten by the zombies was the only disadvantage of that film.
Oh, I have the same feelings for Tom Cruise. I think Oblivion, where there were 18 of him fighting each other at one point, was my worst nightmare.
We're really on the same page here, because my mom hates Tom Cruise, and she kind of passed the hatred towards Tom Cruise upon me.
He's like, I find him really cringy.
Polina, thank you so much for joining us to talk about medieval zombies, and then obviously a lovely little oh my god, and then obviously we digress straight into talking about modern zombies, what we would do, and I'm loving the plan, so I am all in. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It was fascinating.
Join us tomorrow for a double header. First of all, we will be talking all about Caroline of Arnsbach with Charlotte Ward. And we did a lot of quite mean chuckling about her hilarious death down the pub a little while back. So we're going to go back and we're going to do her due credit. And then we will have another Sharp reunion for you to bring in the new year. We will have Sharp's Gold. Now, this one is the one that most of the actors list as the one they hate more than any of the other Sharps. That includes Sean Bean, who says it's his least favourite because it was a load of nonsense. So join us for that one. We'll find out why the plotline took such a drastic veer away from the books, and we'll find all about the shenanigans of filming and inevitably talk about the state of the former KGB crematorium in the Crimea where they all stayed again. So don't miss out on that, and talk about her life as well. So don't miss that one. Don't forget that we do exist on Patreon as History Hack and on Patreon as well, which is Podbean's own version. Alina and I have had massive fun doing this in 2020, but life's going to change quite a lot next year and we're going to actually have to go and earn a living, etc. If we want to keep up the regularity that we've been bringing you and the kind of guests that we've been bringing you and the workload, then we will need your help. So if you join us on either of those platforms, Marcus is currently working on some benefits for you, so there's going to be incentives for joining on either of those platforms. We're revamping ourselves on both of them, so don't forget to go in. You can do as little as $1 a month, and it all goes towards keeping up History Hack as regular as we've been able to bring it to you this year. We are now on YouTube. We are posting all of our new episodes on there, and we have our own channel, and we are gradually posting all of the back episodes because we have been made aware of the fact that you can only find the last 100 on some platforms. So you can go and listen to your heart's content and laugh at the cartoons and have a great time. So do go over there and subscribe.